Welcome, everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Okay, welcome again, everyone, to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city, or state, and your organization. Be sure to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage you to post any questions that you may have during the conversation into the Q&A box. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed to all who registered. And any resources that you see shared as links in the chat will be compiled and shared in the same follow-up email. Finally, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Additionally, before we begin, I would like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. Next week on March 8th, we have an exciting doubleheader, starting with a Crucible of Practice Salon focused on parent engagement and book access, sharing strategies from our community at 12:30 p.m. Later that afternoon, we'll have how education decision makers are maximizing summer to accelerate learning recovery. And the following week on March 15th, we'll have an invite-only funder-to-funder conversation, followed by a session on community schools, a follow-on conversation. Information for these sessions and future ones will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope you can join us. Joining you now is Jill Fioravanti, consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar, Innovation and In-School Tutoring, Updates from Research and On-the-Ground Efforts, a session co-sponsored with Overdeck Family Foundation. High-dosage small group tutoring is a strategy that the Campaign for Grade Level Reading has identified as a critical part of efforts to slow, stop, and reverse learning loss and accelerate equitable learning recovery in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. It is a topic that we have returned to again and again, looking at the research, opportunities for scaling through state policy, and through philanthropic investments. And we are delighted to continue that examination again in today's session with researchers and practitioners who will share information about how high-dosage tutoring is being deployed currently in response to the pandemic through in-person, virtual, and hybrid approaches in ways that are rooted in the research. And to begin that conversation, I'm honored to welcome and introduce our moderator for today. Melanie Dukes is the Senior Program Officer with Overdeck Family Foundation. She serves as a Senior Program Officer for the Innovative Schools portfolio at the Foundation, and this portfolio aims to expand access to tech-enabled, student-centered canine learning environments. Previously, Melanie worked at 2U Inc. as a director in the technology department, supporting online learning for universities. And I'm going to turn it over to Melanie now. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jill. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about innovation and in-school tutoring with this impressive group of panelists. And as one of our panelists reminded me, I want to just say happy Mardi Gras to everybody. To give you a bit more context to why we're here, it's clear that over the past 2 years of pandemic interrupted school, there's been a negative impact on student growth and achievement in both literacy and math. A McKinsey study from the end of 2021 estimated that students were 5 months behind in math and 4 months behind in reading, with an even more severe impact on historically disadvantaged students. So right now, there's an urgent need for effective interventions to address unfinished learning. And like our partners at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, the Overdeck Family Foundation believes that improving a child's ability to learn is the key to unlocking a better future. With that lens, we are investing in high-dosage tutoring as a proven strategy for effectively improving student learning, and we're not alone. as education leaders across the country are increasingly turning to tutoring to help with learning acceleration. And the federal infusion of $24 billion in ESSER funds for districts to spend on evidence-based interventions, such as tutoring, makes this a critical moment for school and district decision makers to gain a deeper understanding of what makes tutoring programs effective and how to select a program that's best aligned to meet their needs. There's so much promise that tutoring offers our students, but there are also several challenges, including whether they can scale effectively given staffing constraints and the high current cost. That brings me to today's conversation and our esteemed panel of research, policy, and nonprofit leaders. During our time today, we'll dive into research on the efficacy of high-dosage tutoring, key criteria districts can use to consider when implementing a tutoring solution, and how tutoring programs have innovated and evolved during the pandemic through the addition of virtual models and small groups that have improved their cost effectiveness. So with that, I will stop talking, and it is my honor to introduce today's panel. First, we have AJ Gutierrez. AJ co-founded Saga Education in 2014 and now serves as Chief of Marketing and Communications and Vice Chair. Saga, as AJ will share in a moment, specializes in scalable personalized solutions and is working to establish high-dosage in-school tutoring as an integrated part of K-12. AJ, welcome. We are excited to have you. Next, I want to introduce Dr. Janice Jackson, who is a nationally known and respected educator after serving 22 years in Chicago Public Schools, most recently as CEO. Under her leadership, CPS students made record-breaking gains in academic achievement, high school graduation, and post-secondary achievement. She currently serves as Senior Advisor to America Achieves and CEO of Hope Chicago. Janice, welcome. Very happy to have you. Shanda Johnson currently serves as Partner Success Director at Zern, a math learning platform, and she taught secondary math and English for more than a decade before transitioning to the Louisiana Department of Education. She's the Mardi Gras person, where she served as a network coach, math specialist, and chief of staff, among other roles. And then finally, we have Susanna Loeb and Jessica Swarovski. Susanna Loeb serves as director of Annenberg Institute for School Reform at Brown University, where she is also a professor of education and of international and public affairs. Susanna is the founder and acting executive director of the National Student Support Accelerator, which she will discuss later in the conversation. And then our last but never least panelist is Jessica Swarovski. She is the CEO of Open Up Resources, a nonprofit working to advance education equity by making high quality curriculum openly accessible to educators. During the pandemic, she founded Ignite Reading, which is a nonprofit working to ensure that every student is an independent reader by the start of second grade through high dosage one-on-one tutoring. None of these introductions do our panelists justice, so let's jump in and let you experience their brilliance for yourself. First, I want to start with you, Susanna, and explore the research and practice around high dosage tutoring. I want to bring you in to talk about the research and what it shows on the efficacy of high dosage tutoring, and specifically what makes tutoring effective and how large are those impacts?
Well, thanks for having me here today. I'm excited to share what we're learning about high impact tutoring. I think I'd like to go a couple of slides in now if possible, even to the next one. Okay, so rarely in research do we have so much evidence pointing to the promise of a specific intervention, in this case, what we call high impact tutoring. Researchers have performed over 150 random control trials. These are systematic studies of program effects that do a really great job of isolating the true effect of the program on student learning. These studies, as you see, these are summaries of the summaries of studies, show positive effects of tutoring across grade levels and subject areas, with effects in most cases ranging from a half a year to more than a year of additional learning over the course of an academic year. Often these results are based on studies of students who are far behind grade level. So tutoring turns out to be a really effective way to accelerate learning for those with substantial learning needs. Next slide. Not only has tutoring been shown to be effective, but as you can see, it's actually been shown to be more effective than almost any other intervention that's been tested. So tutoring is more effective here than technology supports or class size reduction or professional development, all of which can be quite costly as well. Its effectiveness in many ways is not surprising, given that tutoring can target the specific needs of each student, and tutoring from a consistent tutor can help develop the kind of close adult-student relationships that can improve students' engagement in school and their overall well-being. However, we know that, next slide, that many people define tutoring in many different ways, and not all of these approaches are effective. So during the No Child Left Behind era, parents whose children were in schools failing to meet adequate yearly progress for 2 or more years were able to sign their children up for tutoring outside of school. This might sound like a good idea, given that I've said tutoring is so great, but it was not particularly effective or equitable. Few students participated, and we saw very little impact on average. However, even during this time, tutoring demonstrated some positive outcomes in places with things like minimum dosage requirements, more structured tutoring sessions, and stronger coordination with schools. So not all tutoring is effective, but evidence does point to several critical elements for effective tutoring, what we're going to be calling high impact tutoring. Okay, next slide. We can take all of those programs that have shown positive effects and identify their elements, and from that information, create a framework for high impact tutoring. And in particular, we found that 7 elements are critical. The first 3 are really foundational elements of equity, safety, and cohesion, and they support 4 model-specific elements related to the tutor, instruction, learning integration, and data use. And I want to give you just a little detail on each of these. So first, the program must be grounded in equity, and this really means ensuring that students who need it the most have access, and that's going to come up, I think, again and again today. And it means that tutors lead sessions with equity at the center of their instruction. Second, the program has to ensure student safety, and this means designing a tutoring program in which students and their information are safe and protected. And the final foundational element is just cohesion. Good programs have effective leaders who make sure that all these elements that I'm going to be talking about and the internal systems work together cohesively towards the program's goals. So the foundational elements then support these model-specific elements, the first of which is the tutor. Effective programs place a high priority on developing strong tutor-student relationships. And this requires having a consistent tutor who not only has command of the appropriate content knowledge, but just as importantly, is skilled at engaging students in developing those positive relationships. So good programs provide pre-service training and ongoing coaching for tutors. This said, a wide range of people can become really high impact tutors, really effective tutors. And this is important for its ability to scale. While certified teachers have proven to be particularly effective tutors, paraprofessionals and many others can also be very effective tutors. So high impact tutoring programs have strong tutors who have received initial training and have ongoing coaching and evaluation. The next model-specific element is instruction. High-impact tutoring requires special attention to the amount of instruction and the instructional materials used. Evidence shows us that to be high impact, students need to see their tutors at least 3 times per week for at least a semester, and better yet, a school year. The quality of instruction is, of course, also important, and most tutors need quality instructional materials to help them effectively meet their students' academic needs. In terms of learning integration, programs that are embedded in the school day or are directly before or after school are particularly effective. And this can be tricky as it's important not to replace core instruction, but to supplement it. However, this integration with school is important because these are the programs that have higher attendance. And importantly for equity, they're able to reach the students who need tutoring the most. Finally, the fourth and last model-specific element is data. High-impact programs use data to understand students' learning needs and to track their progress. These data can come from the school or the teacher or the program can do their own formative assessments to track progress and design tutoring sessions to meet the needs of individual students. Regardless of the source, what's important is the use of data to tailor instruction for students. Next slide. So just to reiterate, we have an understanding of the characteristics. What characteristics make high impact tutoring? It uses a consistent tutor, not a different tutor at each session. It has this consistency so that it can be relationship focused, not just focused on question resolution. And it uses data and high quality materials to really target students' needs. We're also continuing to learn more from research so we can improve its effectiveness and its cost effectiveness and its ability to serve more students who can benefit from this personalized approach. But this, I think, is where the research is now.
That was very impressive. I think I just got a tutoring 101 in 5 minutes. So thank you very much. One of the questions I had around this is a lot of what you described happened before COVID. And do we have any research about what happened during COVID? Or can you maybe point us to things that might be different in what you described?
Yeah, that's a great question, Melanie. Thank you. We don't have results of many studies that occurred during the pandemic. It wasn't the greatest time for research. However, there are a few completed, and there's some others that are going to be important that are in the field. We're encouraged by an Italian study on virtual tutoring during the pandemic by Michela Carlana that demonstrated significant learning and other benefits for students. The program involved volunteer university students who were randomly assigned to tutor middle schoolers in low-income areas. And the study found that the program substantially increased students' academic performance. And it significantly improved their social emotional skills, their aspirations, and their psychological well-being. So we found that tutoring can work virtually and during the pandemic, and that's important. Recently, we did a study of an on-demand tutoring program, which also provided important but far less encouraging results. It was clear that when the program is opt-in, so students can choose whether to do it or not, even if it's high quality, only a few students take it up. Without direct encouragement, only 19% of students made use of the help, and those tended to be students with higher prior academic achievement. This was not an equity enhancing intervention. Nudges to parents and students increased take up quite a bit, but still less than 30% took it up. And we have questions basically on whether these 24/7 opt-in programs can reach the students who need them the most. Many other studies are currently underway or in planning stages. We have an implementation study across 10 districts to help understand what types of tutoring programs are being implemented for whom and what some of the bigger challenges and solutions are that are going on. We and others have a number of experimental studies underway to understand how to improve effectiveness and cost effectiveness, but unfortunately the results are not yet available.
So helpful. I really appreciate that as a background. I would love to shift a little bit to bring Janice in, if that's okay, and shift this to the practice. This was really, really helpful and a great foundation, Susanna. Janice, before joining Hope Chicago as CEO, you were the CEO of Chicago Public Schools, as we mentioned, where Saga Education, one of the tutoring providers we'll hear from shortly, got its start. So would love to hear maybe a district perspective and more specifically, why tutoring was important to bring to Chicago Public Schools and what were some of the early results that made you committed to this work.
Yeah,
and welcome.
Well, thank you, Melanie, for having me here. First of all, I really want to underscore the importance of Susanna's presentation. Like you, every time I hear her speak, it's just a quick primer on why this work is so important. Like most districts, when we were afforded additional resources through the ESSER dollars, we thought about high impact tutoring as one of the core strategies to address learning loss that had occurred during the pandemic. A lot of this was born out of just national trends, but as you pointed out, some of the early success that Chicago Public Schools had experienced through programs like Saga and other high dosage programming that we had implemented throughout the district. What we noticed then, and some of these things are bubbling up now, even in this pandemic environment, is a few things. One, quality matters a whole lot. Consistency matters, but the relationship between the tutor and the students matters a whole lot. And so we really wanted to develop a program, a tutoring program that prioritized having a core group of individuals who are working directly with our schools. Happy to talk later in more depth about some of the challenges embedded there. Just like most district, staffing became an issue, but we were able to get through it and able to staff that programming. But I think one of the lessons learned going forward is you really do have to make sure there is a core group of individuals to do this. And then more importantly, make sure you build in a system to account for quality. Going back to Saga, there's been research, and I'm sure most folks on this call are familiar with it, that really showed the impact that we saw in one single year in math in particular, in schools that implemented the Saga program. And so the opportunity to do that in a more widespread manner throughout the district was something that was attractive to us. And when we saw that we had additional dollars, it was an easy choice to make. We also think that it's an equity issue, which has been pointed out earlier. We know that many students from affluent backgrounds naturally have this as a resource, even prior to the pandemic and in a non-emergency, if you will, type of environment. And so the opportunity to really get this right, as Susanna pointed out the second time around after No Child Left Behind, I think has been critically important. And so my message to a lot of the district leaders who are on the call is really just about what this moment and opportunity presents for us. How do we do this in a way where we learn, but also are able to scale best practices, but more importantly, do it in a way where it is both sustainable and affordable so that we really can achieve these goals around equity and kind of move away from a place where some people have access while others do not. So that's my part on why we thought that was such a critical lever, but happy to take, more questions around what implementation looked like and how we solve for some of those challenges.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate that you snuck a call to action in there for some of the district leaders. I think that's a really important thing to add. If you're okay with it, I have another question, but I want to just briefly bring in Shanda, if that's okay. We didn't mention this, but she was the Deputy Assistant Superintendent of Academic Content for the Louisiana Department of Education before she joined ZERN. So I think that her district perspective can also supplement what you have, and I'd love to hear her perspective about the importance of tutoring and early research in Louisiana as well. Shanda, can I bring you in for that? Thank you.
Yes. Happy to share some of my experience here in Louisiana. And again, happy Mardi Gras. So in Louisiana, we had widespread adoption of high quality instructional materials and had been focused on acceleration prior to COVID. And so once schools closed due to COVID, we were actually in a pretty good spot in terms of using materials. So our schools knew that using high quality materials was important. And as a State Department, that was the easy part for us. We were able to reach out to our high quality providers like ZERN and tell them what school systems were asking us for. So, if there was a print component that they needed digitally, we were able to quickly respond because we had built that system. And so then we were able to support with things like making sure that they remember to send every kid home with a computer and those sorts of things. So when schools reopened the next year, we knew that there would be more unfinished learning than ever before and across our entire state. We remained committed to high quality materials. And we remain committed to this idea of learning acceleration and making sure that every student was on grade level every day. But we were beginning to hear this national conversation around tutoring. And so for us, it really felt like a moment to bring those three components together so that districts could really help students with their unfinished learning. So we work with districts to help them understand those pieces. So in terms of acceleration, we had been telling districts for years, make sure that students are on grade level every day. But with so much unfinished learning, we knew there was going to be a temptation to kind of go back to all of the stuff that hadn't been taught the year before. So we really worked to make sure that they understood acceleration. For tutoring with high quality instructional materials, the challenge there was that while our systems were almost entirely using HQIM for core instruction, that wasn't always necessarily the case during tutoring time. So we had to work to ensure that they understood to use high quality materials during tutoring. So in some cases, that was easier than others. So we had some districts that were already using high quality tutoring materials like Zern. Then we had some districts that didn't have anything that was high quality. So at that point, we reached out to we call them Louisiana teacher leaders, and they actually dug into high quality materials and developed tutoring lessons that could be used in either face-to-face tutoring or virtually if we had to go back virtual. And then from there, we really work with systems to get them to understand best practices in tutoring. So many of our systems, the first worry they had when we talked to them about tutoring was, how am I going to find the time? They thought their calendar and their days were already packed. So we had to work with them to get them to understand that many of them already had time that they could use, whether they called it study hall or intervention. So we worked there. Overall, we've seen most of our districts in Louisiana start to incorporate tutoring into their days. We haven't had time to do any studies. Everybody's still in survival mode, I think, everywhere right now. But I will say that overall, I see more districts dedicating time and resources to tutoring. It's everywhere now in a way that I haven't seen before. And so for me, that feels like a win. So excited to share that experience.
Thank you. Feels like a win for me too. Janice, I want to bring you back in. Thank you so much, Chanda, for that perspective. I know that you, congratulations, were recently the senior advisor for America Achieves. This may not be an initiative everyone knows about, so wondering if you can talk to us about what America Achieves is hoping to accomplish and the opportunity you see for tutoring and other forms of individualized learning to help us address the learning loss that we saw during COVID.
Yeah, well, definitely want to take an opportunity to talk about this initiative. What we're launching is a national tutoring initiative, and I'll say as much as I can right now without giving away too many of the upcoming headlines, but we think it's an enormous opportunity to address issues around learning loss due to COVID, but also take advantage of the record amount of funding that many of our districts have received during this time. It's no secret that there are deep inequities in our education system that have long existed prior to the pandemic, but all of us have witnessed those gaps widen over the past 2 years just because of all the uncertainty and different types of learning that our students were able to receive while learning at home or learning in a hybrid model. There were just so many differences that we have to account for. I also think that we don't want to just focus on recovery from the pandemic. This is also an opportunity to achieve greater equity and make sure that all students have access to high quality, high dosage tutoring post-pandemic. It should be free, it should be affordable, and it should be accessible and ubiquitous in all of our school systems. And that's just simply not the case, largely due to cost and limited understanding of how to scale this effectively. And so we see this as an opportunity to test this and pilot it in some districts, but more importantly, share our learnings more broadly so that this becomes more in the fabric of what happens in school systems across the country. So I don't want to give away too much. Like I said, stay tuned for more announcements around this, but I think it's an awesome responsibility. We're implementing while learning and also studying our work. And so, as a practitioner, but also someone very interested in research, it's just really interesting to be kind of teetering between the two. And so we really want to engage as many school leaders and school districts as possible around this work, because the more data we have, the more we will learn about how to do this effectively. And ultimately, that's going to lead to more children benefiting.
I love the vision. It sounds so ambitious, and I can't wait to see what happens as a result. And honestly, between you and Chanda and Susanna, so many questions have come up for me that I would love to interject. But I will pause, and I also, for the audience, if you guys have questions, don't forget to ask. We will have room at the end for Q&A. But there are two last questions I have, actually for both of you to engage in a conversation around before we transition to the providers. The first is, it's evident from both of your statements how critical tutoring is, but also there's an equity piece behind that in what you all are talking about. And I can imagine as a district leader, it's probably overwhelming to figure out, what do I choose? How do I get guidance on how to pick that? So I'm curious if you all can share some criteria that you would recommend districts consider when they're implementing a tutoring solution. And does this change if they decide to do a hybrid or virtual model in their implementation? And Susanna, if you're okay, I will kick off with you. And then Janice, I will see if there's anything you have to add there.
Yeah, so I actually think it's quite similar in hybrid or in virtual as it is. I first would make sure that the program is meeting some of the standards that I described above. So does it have the features of high impact tutoring, or is it just the homework help, where the student comes and meets a different tutor each time? With an advisory board of leading researchers and practitioners from across the country, we built this tutoring quality improvement system, what we call TQIS, that's designed specifically to quickly assess whether the program's aligned with research-backed standards and also provide practical guidance for how to become more aligned. We have self-assessments, and then if you want a more in-depth validated assessment, I think districts can use this to see whether they're designing their program in line with what the research shows to be effective. The second thing is I would make sure that the students who need it most are getting it. It's much better to start small and do it really well for the students who really need it, then expand it out once you have it down. We know weak tutoring programs aren't effective, and we know a lot of forces lead more engaged students to get better access to the opportunity than other students do. I would make sure that you're reaching the students who don't often have access to what they need, and that you're doing a really good job with that program.
Yeah, thank you. I would double click on a lot of what Susanna said. First, this notion around quality, that all tutoring is not high impact tutoring. So having a working understanding of what that means. I told Susanna when she briefed me on her framework, first of all, I never met a framework I didn't like, but it was just really helpful to see those 7 components and think about things that I've implemented in the past before. And I could clearly see glaring omissions, right? And so I think we have to make sure that those components are taken into consideration. And it will be interesting to see what happens. What do we lose when we don't have one component? If we don't have the high quality materials, what do we lose? What's the effect on the results? And so that's something that I wanted to lift up. I think the other thing is that we do have to acknowledge that there are real challenges to implementing this, whether it's in person or virtual. And so making sure that there's appropriate staffing, that there is a tutoring program, a training program for adults who are going to be interacting with students, and just building this with quality in mind. And then lastly, connected to that, we should also make sure that there's some connective tissue to what happens in the classroom. There was already a question in the chat that connects to this that was asking, like, what's the difference between high impact tutoring and RTI interventions? And, Susanna obviously can go a little bit deeper on this, but I would say you need the connection, but this is outside of class time. It's the additional support and dose that students need in order to, stay on pace, catch up with their peers, whatever, you're trying to solve for. I also think that it's much more focused on skills that students need in order to access the curriculum. And so those are some of the distinctions that I see between the two models. But I think anyone implementing that has to be really clear about what problem they're trying to solve for, and whether or not this is the right method to do it.
I so appreciate you answering that question in the chat, Janice. Thank you for that. Yes. Susanna, is there anything that you would want to add to that, the question around the difference between tutoring and RTI and some of the other interventions?
Yeah, so I think it can be used kind of in tier 1 or tier 2, the tutoring. So, but there definitely are overlaps. And one thing is that it does fulfill, I think, some of the requirements for tier 2, so that it really could be used on a wider scale, even with the funds that are already, that have been in districts for quite a while.
Perfect. And then I'm just giving you a heads up, Janice, I have another question. I'm going to come to you first on this one, just so that it's not always Susanna. So you guys talked briefly just about, there's different things that we need to figure out. Like, do we need the curriculum, and what do we lose if we do it? So I'm curious if you guys can get just a little bit more specific on that question as we figure things out about what research questions do we still have left to explore, and any recommendations you have around how we can get that evidence balanced with, you know, it takes some time to do really good evidence and we need answers quickly. And I'm calling on you, Janice, first. I hope that is okay. And then
No, it's okay. Although,
okay.
no, it's okay. But I think Susanna is definitely the expert on research. But I can say, just from someone who spent a lot of time thinking about this and trying to solve these issues, I think the question I lifted up earlier is obviously a big one. Now that we have the framework and we know a whole lot more about what a comprehensive approach looks like, what are the high levers? You know, because people will find themselves in positions where, you know, maybe there are trade-offs. I hate to say it, we're promoting fidelity in implementation, but, you know, we know that there are people who may be using online systems and they're not getting that consistent piece, which is a huge part of the pie that jumped out to me. And so I would love to hear directly from Susanna, who would have more information about that. But the only other question I think that would be important, we have a lot of data specifically in Chicago as it relates to math and the impact because of Saga. Would love to see what that looks like across other domains. In particular, science is an area that I think a lot of students struggle with. And then of course, reading is crucial to accessing any discipline. And so we'd just love to see more data in some of the other disciplines.
I can follow up on that. So I think there are two sets of research questions that should take priority. And the first is really about these features of effective programs. I've given you kind of a set of features that we've pulled out from programs that have been effective, but we don't really know some of the trade-offs that Janice was telling us about. And those are going to be really important as we try to go to scale, and cost effectiveness becomes important there, or really is central to our ability to scale. I think we've got opportunities as we're putting in the program to do some tests, some A/B testing of one thing versus another, and that can really help us as we move forward. So maybe we don't know how much less effective it is if students meet in groups of 3 rather than in groups of 2. So let's try both of them. Let's randomly assign students to either groups of 3 or groups of 2 and see if it makes a difference. If it makes a huge difference, then we want to go stick with the 2. But if it doesn't, then we can really save a lot of money, get this to more students, get it in more subject areas and things like that. So these features are one area that I think we really could use some good research. I would think things like the intensity of it, how many times a week, how many students per tutor are really important. But we shouldn't forget that this oversight of tutors, this coaching for tutors is also really important and also really costly. And so some tests there too of just how much supervision the tutors get and how important that is for it to be effective, I think is really important. So that's one area I think we can improve cost effectiveness and effectiveness with some studies that really aren't that difficult to do. The second area is really about conditions that enable schools and districts to implement tutoring well. What state policies or state supports help districts implement well? Within districts, what kind of decision-making processes and resource allocations lead to the best outcomes for students? And while these studies are somewhat less concrete than the experimental tests of programs, they're really going to be essential to substantially increase access. So I'm particularly interested in what states can do, and if we can study, the effects of policies like the ones that Texas are doing or some other ones. I think that would be a great help.
Whew, that was fantastic, both of you. Your passion, Susanna, makes me want to just give you all of the money that I had if I could. And Janice, your call to action just makes me want to take action. So thank you both. I can imagine that our tutoring providers are probably have multiple questions, want to get involved in the conversation. So I'm going to shift from research to practice to bring them in, and then we'll bring you guys back at the end. But thank you so much. That was fantastic. AJ, Shanda, and Jessica, I know you guys probably have lots of comments and insights that you learned from there. I promise we will allow you to weigh in later. But can you start off, each of you, and maybe introduce your program to the listeners, and then maybe specifically the problem that your program is trying to solve, as well as how you provide the tutoring, the format, and who the tutors are. And it would also be great to reference any data that you have on efficacy to complement what we heard in the first section. We will start with you, Jessica, who I know represents Ignite Reading, and you are a new virtual tutoring program developed during the pandemic. So Jessica, I will leave it to you.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Thank you, fellow panelists, and thank you to everyone who's joining this important conversation today. Ignite Reading's mission is to ensure that every student learns to read on time. Next slide, please. Our country's NAEP data tells us that 65% of students do not read at grade level. Teachers lack the curriculum, the training, and the data that is needed to teach students to read in order to ensure that they are off to the races, building knowledge as quickly as possible. Only 1 in 4 elementary teachers steps into the classroom trained in an evidence-based reading curriculum, and most schools' literacy programs are still not grounded in the science of reading and continue to lack direct, explicit, systematic, coherent instruction and foundational reading skills in the K-2 grade band. Students are not getting equitable access to the instruction that they need in order to crack the code of the English language so that they have automatic word recognition and thus fluency. And while foundational skills aren't the game, they are the ticket to the game. Kids must become code breakers in order to ultimately become meaning makers. In other words, reading is the operating system of education. And if our kids can't read, they can't learn. Next slide. Ignite's solution is to partner with schools to embed daily 15-minute one-on-one data-driven foundational reading skills instruction with a highly trained tutor as part of the school's literacy programming. We are building a national core of tutors that are highly trained in the science of reading and an evidence-based foundational reading skills curriculum. These tutors receive intensive upfront training and real-time coaching and feedback. They are data-driven reading teachers and utilize baseline diagnostics and ongoing progress monitoring in order to ensure that every single session is precisely tailored to exactly what the student needs based on where they are on the continuum of learning how to read. And we leverage the power of virtual to ensure that our tutors, all of whom are paid and many of whom are college students, are implementing the curriculum with 100% fidelity. And all of these things are key to the results that we are seeing in our first year of piloting. Next slide, please. Our students, who range in age from kindergarten through 5th grade, are making on average 2.5 weeks of reading progress for each week that they are in our program. And we're corroborating our results with dibbles. And we're seeing that our students, all of whom are at risk, are making 2.5 times faster growth. And this is because of the way that our program is structured. Next slide, please. And these initial results are incredibly promising, and we're super excited to be working at this point in 3 states with another expansion planned for the end of March. Next slide. And all of this is gearing up for what's going to happen this fall when we launch a 1,000 student pilot that's focused upon something we are calling the first grade promise. Ignite Reading students will leave first grade fluent, independent readers ready to begin building knowledge in 2nd grade. And we see this as utterly crucial from an equity standpoint, because everything else about their success in school and their success in life is contingent upon ensuring that students once and for all learn to read on time. Our promise is 1.5 years of reading progress that enables students to crack the code, develop automatic word recognition so that they can fluently read grade level texts, and are prepared to begin building knowledge in 2nd grade.
This is fantastic, and I'm so excited about your results. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jessica. Chanda, I want to shift over to you and see if you can share more about ZERN with us.
Absolutely. So ZERN is the nonprofit educational organization behind ZERN Math, a top-rated math learning platform that's currently used by 1 in 4 elementary students nationwide. We offer research-backed curriculum and digital lessons to accelerate learning so that all students can both catch up and move forward. So what really makes ZERN unique is that we're designed to work alongside core instruction. And so that gives kids more opportunity to explore grade level math with built-in differentiated support. So Zern is being used in a lot of different learning acceleration models, everything from a core complement during a math block to more recently a tutoring implementation. So our platform provides all of the content that schools and districts, and most recently states, need to support a high quality data-driven tutoring program. We have materials for tutors to lead high impact tutoring sessions. We have student facing digital math lessons that are rigorous and engaging. And then we have embedded progress monitoring to ensure that tutoring time is effective. We've been adopted statewide as a math tutoring platform in both Tennessee and in Texas. Part of the reason that I recently decided to join Zern from the Louisiana Department of Education is that I saw firsthand the impact that Zern had on student learning. So Harvard did a longitudinal study across 5 years in our state, 100,000 students, and it showed that students who programmatically used Zern experienced outsized achievement gains greater than what we saw in districts who were using HQIM alone. So essentially, Zern was creating impact at a statewide scale. And then more recently, a newly released study of math achievement during the pandemic found that consistent Zern usage dramatically reduced learning loss. And that was for students at all levels of math proficiency. This study found that Zern was particularly effective for students who are below standard. Those students experienced 2 to 3 times growth in assessment scores when they were using Zern during the pandemic. So there are a couple of links to the research that I mentioned that I think are going to get dropped in the chat, but excited to talk more about tutoring today.
Thank you. And then AJ, would you like to round us out with Saga?
Hey everyone, thank you so much, Melanie. I'm AJ, the co-founder of Saga. We are an ed tech nonprofit organization. We specialize in personalized learning. We are a trusted international leader in implementing high-impact in-school day tutoring models. We are a level 1 ESSER rated evidence-based organization. To date, we've been involved in 8 randomized control research studies in multiple districts domestically and also internationally, as well as with multiple research partners. Our primary partners, amazing folks at the University of Chicago Education Lab. And when you think about the scientific literature on high impact tutoring, the research on Saga Education is the largest, and we've also demonstrated some of the largest effect sizes with as much as 2.5 years of math growth in 1 year on standardized test scores, among many other interesting results. And this data has been published in the U.S. Department of Education's recent COVID-19 guidelines to school districts. So we're so excited that the research by the University of Chicago is helping to inform public policy on high impact tutoring. What's really interesting about Saga and our model is that we're addressing a fundamental challenge in U.S. public education, which is that mismatch between where kids are academically and what teachers are expected to teach in the classroom. And there's so much variability in what kids know and what they can do. And even for a master teacher to consistently provide targeted instructional support is nearly impossible. So we're addressing that central problem head on by providing high impact in-school tutoring, where tutoring is part of the regular school day as its own class. It's its own standalone class in addition to core classroom instruction. A student would work with his or her tutor every day or every other day throughout the entire duration of the school year, which is why we coined that term high dosage tutoring. And we keep these pairings consistent so they form strong, meaningful connections with one another. To answer your question about who provides the tutoring, what's interesting about Saga is that we don't use certified teachers or professional educators. And yet, the impact we have leads to unprecedented outcomes for students. And so central to accelerating student learning to that extent requires really intensive approach on supporting tutors, having a systematic approach for providing high quality content that aligns with grade level standards, a plan for intensive training, as well as ongoing professional development. If I had to pick a secret sauce for our success at Saga, is having a turnkey support for supporting tutors. The other thing I want to say is that, you know, I'm a relationship-driven person, and I have a picture here of my amazing daughter, Olivia, if you could see her there. She's already way cooler than I'll ever be. I love to go hiking with Olivia, and I recently took her up to a mountain, and she was not having it. And about halfway up, she pauses, she turns around and looks at me and says, "What? Are we here just to step on rocks or something?" Which I thought was really funny because I never heard anyone put it that way. So technically she's true, it's true, but that's really not why we were here. And when she got to the top of the mountain, she really saw the value of what we're trying to accomplish together. And I think similarly, we're thinking too narrowly about tutoring. What we're trying to accomplish at Saga is what we're seeking to do is make sure that high impact in-school tutoring is a central part of school design. And I hope this session pushes you to think differently about educational delivery, carving out a new space for a new type of role in school tutoring to supplement the great work of our classroom teachers. And at Saga, we're not looking to dramatically grow our direct programming. Although we will be interested in growing our direct program in some select cities, what we're looking to do is help strengthen and build the capacity of other schools and districts throughout the United States to replicate our evidence-based programs, provide a suite of service and support on program design, and giving folks access to our tools and resources so that they can implement this work effectively. So I wanted to share this because this is a message of empowerment for you as a district leader. You can do this, and in Saga, we want to support you along the way.
Thank you so much, AJ. One of the things I feel like I've had the pleasure to watch Saga do is innovate in this moment. And this is obviously a webinar around innovation. So on the back of that, you talked about high dosage tutoring, but there are some innovative things that you all have done. And I'm wondering if you can share more about that. And then Jessica and Chanda, I would also love to hear more about how each of you have also innovated your program models to meet the changing needs of students in these times.
Want to start off with me, Melanie?
I would love to. I'll do you, AJ, and then Jessica and Chanda. That way I don't have to interrupt.
Well, I could geek out with you. I mean, what's so exciting about Saga is just this spirit of curiosity that we're always looking to try new things. And as we try new permutations, using rigorous evidence to understand how that affects student outcomes. And so even before the pandemic, we were very interested in online instruction. And we actually worked closely with NORC and College Board and testing an online tutoring pilot. And the results from that RCT are really encouraging. Unfortunately, I can't share that data with you, but I'm working on getting permission from NORC and College Board to share that publicly. But it was compelling enough for us where we knew that it's possible to maintain high instructional quality in an online setting. And this is important in the context of COVID-19 because we're able to draw from that experience to do our best to maintain instructional continuity for kids during the pandemic. About 50% of our program right now is online. And so, and what was interesting about our online model is that when you're supporting students online, you need to have a platform that facilitates instruction really well. So our ed tech team developed that platform for us. And I know these are fighting words, but Zoom is not a great tool to facilitate tutoring. And so we need something that has digital scratch pads, that has a whiteboard, that has integrated curriculum, things that a system that's designed with educators in mind. And so that's the tool we created, which was really exciting, innovative process that we developed during COVID-19. The other piece that was tremendously encouraging for us is that we're looking at our own internal data along the way and suggesting that the results that we're seeing from an online setting is almost just as good as our in-person setting. And so we're looking at ways to really optimize that experience online so that we can focus on maximizing the relationships that students have with their tutors in an online setting.
Thank you.
So I am definitely a silver linings kind of girl, and the pandemic presented an opportunity to harness the power of virtual. And when we launched Ignite Reading last summer with a 9-week program, we originally started going direct to families of students that were attending Title I schools. However, we quickly realized that from an equity standpoint, we needed to partner with schools. So one of the shifts that we've made, even amidst launching during the pandemic, was to very quickly pivot this past fall and embed Ignite as part of the school day, and specifically as part of the literacy programming to complement what was happening in Tier 1 instruction and further accelerate student learning. I also mentioned this first grade promise in my introduction, and this is something that we're continuing to hone based on what we learn each day working with our tutors and our students, because there is such a powerful opportunity to close gaps and accelerate learning. And we really want to take advantage of every single precious minute of instruction in order to do so. And the third thing I'll share is that one of the unexpected learnings that we've had in piloting Ignite is how strong the social emotional learning component of our program is, as students build these really strong relationships with their tutors who are caring adults who are also highly trained in direct foundational skills instruction. And the feedback that we're getting from our school partners is that for many of the students, Ignite is the best time of day for them because they are working with an adult that they're building a relationship with, but that relationship is being built around the act of learning to read and gaining critical competencies in becoming a more skilled reader and getting that instruction in their zone of proximal development. So it just feels really good for them, and it's shifting their identities as readers, which is key to their long-term success beyond the program of Ignite.
Thank you.
Okay, so when I think about Zern in the last 24 months, there are two different things I really think about. First, Zern is designed to be flexible to meet the needs of all of our different communities we serve. So Zern can be used as a digital math companion to high quality instructional materials. It can be used as a tutoring platform, or it can be used as full core curriculum. So it's flexible so that if I'm a teacher or administrator or a parent, it's usable for me. So as we've been asked by more SEAs and LEAs to be used as a platform for tutoring, we've built a lot of additional supports over these last 24 months. So those things include tutoring playbooks. We've created guides to support tutors as they're getting started with tutoring with Zern. And we've really invested in training for using Zern for tutoring. So we're working really closely with educators to make sure that our Zern materials are robust, rigorous, engaging, and relevant for how students and schools are using them for tutoring. And so that commitment to really serving educators has really resulted in lots of adoption across all of the use cases I mentioned for Zern over the last 2 years. And then secondly, I just think about in general how Zern is just a program that's continuously evolving. So over 10 billion math problems have been completed on Zern to date. And so we have all of that data and we use it to make our program better, to better meet the needs of teachers and students. So one thing that's really unique about Zern is that our digital math lessons are built with multiple layers of support. Of course, all designed for students to be engaged in grade level learning. So these lessons are designed so that kids can catch up and move forward at the same time. We don't assume that students come into a grade having mastered everything from prior grades. And so our materials don't assume that. So that's one of the most important parts about Zern, that we're continuously assessing, diagnosing, and giving students the boost that they need so that they can get to their grade level learning. So over the last 2 years, we have so much unfinished learning. And so educators really needed this type of material that we provide with that built-in learning acceleration. And so we've been updating our pathways in our product to make sure that we're addressing unfinished learning in that context of new learning. And so over the past 2 years, we've just continued to improve acceleration in our materials using all the data that we've been able to collect.
Thank you so much. That was really fantastic. And since I am close to all of your organizations, it's really just always a pleasure to hear you kind of narrate what you guys are doing and the innovations that you are expanding on. I want to transition to my favorite part, hopefully everyone else's as well, which is where we bring everyone together, and we will have Q&A from the group. So if you guys do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But we also have 2 questions that we want to ask and get insight in from all perspectives. So the first is really, we kind of heard about from Saga and Zern about the changes that you all made to your programs because of COVID, and then Ignite you launched as a result of that. And then we also know that ESSER funding and this $122 billion for districts to spend to accelerate learning loss really is going to have an impact on what we were able to do. And so I'm hoping each of you can talk to us about the impact of the federal and state funding on tutoring writ large, how your organizations are thinking about a potential funding cliff, because I know one of you is like, it may not happen. And then what is it that you need to be successful going forward, funding something else, and who is it that can help? So that was a lot of questions. So just to summarize, it is what is the impact of the federal funding on each of your programs, the initiatives? And then the funding cliff in general, is there an impact? And maybe we'd love to hear about that. And then specifically, what do you need to be successful and who can help? Cool. And I'm happy to put that in the chat if we need as well. AJ, we'll start with you. I can call everyone in, but it'll be AJ, Shanda, Jessica, Susanna, and Janice. So excited for this one.
There's a lot of questions, like compound question, you know, like I object, Your Honor, it's a lot to squeeze in there. I mean, I think first, educators throughout the United States have been clearly understood there's underinvestment. And right now we're getting the resources that we've all been fighting for, and we should fight like hell to keep it over the next 3 years. So I would argue to everyone on this call, don't accept it, don't just merely accept that this fiscal cliff is going to happen. And right now it presents an opportunity to demonstrate to policymakers how we're using these resources to invest in evidence-based programs that are generating high return on investment for youth. So that's the big thing. Through a practical lens, what's crucial over the next 3 years is really getting it right and demonstrating that high impact tutoring is a really great value add, not just with respect to accelerating student learning, but there are these ancillary benefits that go along with implementing this type of work that's really crucial for education. So high impact tutoring is a great tool to help students build their foundational skills and conceptual understanding of what's going on in the classroom. It's a really wonderful talent pipeline. It creates a great opportunity to cultivate and nurture the next generation of highly qualified educators. And there's a wonderful opportunity to be much more intentional about what that looks like. It's a wonderful parent engagement tool. You know, tutors are much more likely to be able to connect and communicate with families to make sure that they feel part of their child's learning. And the last aspect is a really powerful tool for mentorship to make sure that kids feel connected to a caring adult in school. All the districts and schools spend money on each one of these buckets. And what's exciting about high impact tutoring, if you look at it from a cost-effective perspective, it helps supplement all the things districts are interested in doing. And what we're thinking when we're talking about school counselor, when we're talking about providing social emotional support, what we're really talking about is an integrated approach that focuses on a student. And central to that is carving out a new role in school tutoring that can help keep eyes specifically on a student. And that shift in thinking, I think, is tremendous value add as we think about the next derivative of school design. And so I think this is, to make this shift, I think we have to make a compelling case that high impact tutoring is a value add in regards to all the things we're thinking about when it comes to supporting our youth.
Thank you. Fight the funding cliff. So Shanda, on to you.
I was going to say, I think I'm next. So as AJ was talking, I wrote down getting it right, because that kind of resonated with me, because I think so often in the education world that we all live in, there's a new idea and everybody loves it and we all kind of hop on the bandwagon. And as soon as it's not perfect, we all jump off the bandwagon and we're on to the next thing, right? So the reason it feels like we're all going to be out of money in 2 or 3 years is because we're used to that cycle. But if instead we invest this money now, we train tutors, we invest in high quality materials like CERN, and like we build our ecosystems, and then we see how things are going, we collect data, we analyze that data, we make improvements on what we're building, then you don't have that kind of startup cost all over again, right? And you instead work on improving the system that you've built. So for me, that's what's going to be most important across our country, every state, every district. Let's build this together. Let's get it right. Let's learn together. Let's learn from each other. What did you figure out? Like, how can I use that to improve my program? And let's not all start over again in 2 or 3 years, because that's when the money is going to be an issue. If we learn and grow together, then we can continue to fund the work instead of starting over.
It's been really great hearing my panelists share. So thanks so much, AJ, and thank you, Shonda. In terms of this first piece around the federal funding, I've been thinking a lot about how schools and districts, because of this funding, have so much more intentionality around the work and around trying to understand what their options are for tutoring and how to best serve their students given the pandemic-related learning loss, but how it's also opened the door to have conversations around what was not ideal before the pandemic and how to then be more proactive going forward because of this opportunity of the pandemic, coupled with all of the federal funding. And so recently, Ed Week had a webinar where they were talking about tutoring, and the district leader who was sharing explained how now that they've experienced the power of tutoring, they want more of it. And they want to figure out, what does it mean for this to be proactively part of how we envision teaching and learning in our district? And with that in mind, she shared how her operating budget will evolve to include tutoring in the future, whether or not there is additional federal funding. I think this is really smart. I think it is deeply intentional and strategic and proactive. And I genuinely hope that more schools and districts are beginning to think and plan in this way. I'm personally not worried about a funding cliff, though perhaps that's because I'm an eternal optimist. And I am putting all of my energy into being fully focused upon the quality of what we are building with Ignite Reading, because that is the most important thing for us to get right. And it's important because kids deserve equitable access to learning to read. And if not now, when? And our ability to ensure that kids leave first grade reading is key to systemic change, which ultimately has huge cost savings for schools downstream. And we also believe that Ignite can be an on-ramp for school-wide literacy transformation. And we partner with schools and districts with this intentionality in mind, because the curriculum that underpins Ignite is not a proprietary curriculum. It's a curriculum called How to Plan Differentiated Reading Instruction by Dr. Sharon Walpole. And it's part of a comprehensive core curriculum called Bookworms. And so the goal is to on-ramp schools by being a foundational skills insurance policy initially, but for them to not be dependent upon tutoring long-term, and ultimately overhaul their literacy ecosystem to equitably serve kids. So our goal is to ignite the students, ignite the school, and ignite the system. And so what I need right now is schools and districts that want to join our movement and be part of this first grade promise that we will be launching in the fall.
Yeah. Can I just jump in? Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to jump in and build on that and say, I am more worried about the funding cliff, although I do share Jessica's optimism in a lot of the points that were raised. But I also want to just underscore a few things. One, because there is, this funding cliff on the horizon, that is not a reason not to do it. And I think that's the message from all of the panelists. I also would encourage district leaders to think about the opportunity that's embedded in this, which is it's hard to get the funding, the resources, the research, all of those things lined up to really place a new bet on what we're doing in schools. And so those components are there. And so as district leaders, that's something you want to take advantage of, because that doesn't come around often. I think the other piece is then, how do you look at, there are some new costs built into that, but there also are existing costs that we currently have pre-existing funding streams to support. And so it really is about, if you make this bet, you implement well, you see the return on investment, you see impact by way of student achievement. How do you then organize your districts in a way where this is sustainable? I think if you have results and you have documented evidence that it's working, the funding will be there because you're going to prioritize it because you've seen its effectiveness. So that's how I would approach that question. And then the last thing I would say around sustainability is really just around staffing. And I know I keep harping on this, but I can't turn off the superintendent frame on this. And I think one of the things that shows the promise of what we're doing, in addition to all the sentiments that were shared today, is that the president himself has really marked high impact tutoring as something that we should be focused on as we try to recover from the effects of the pandemic in schools. And in fact, is calling on all, people who are in a position to do so to join this effort to help support students through various tutoring efforts. And so I think this is a moment. So if I in a district position on this call, I would be thinking about how to be a part of this moment and movement, because I really do think that there is going to be a lot of leverage to impact student achievement.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. So I think we're really in this special moment where we have this unprecedented need, but we also have an unprecedented opportunity to adjust how we're doing schooling so that all students have access to a high impact tutor who can help them academically and also really be a champion for them. And the ESSER funding can be a catalyst for expanding tutoring, especially to address the COVID related learning needs. But I think all of us are saying here that there's every reason to believe that this kind of high impact tutoring would be beneficial in the long run, providing opportunities to excel for students who've often been excluded from these kinds of opportunities. And if we're going to sustain tutoring, I think we're going to have to do three things right in the short run. And the first is we have to do it well now. We can't just provide opt-in homework help or computer-assisted learning. We have to implement high-quality programs that benefit students. And I think that's what everyone on the phone has been talking about. Second, we need evidence that the programs are actually working. And Janice said this too. These next 2 years are going to be really important proof points that tutoring can meet the needs of students. We're never going to do it right the first time, but we have to keep getting it better and better so that we can see that this can really be effective. And then I also think that we need to build some infrastructure, more good instructional materials for tutoring, more sources for tutors, really more school models that incorporate tutoring in the school day. There was a good question about schedules and how you get this into schedules so that we can more easily sustain and even expand access. In the longer run, there could be new money, but Title I and Title IV dollars are good sources of funding, and districts have already used these to support tutoring even prior to the pandemic. For now, ESSER funding provides the opportunity to get it started and do it right, and I really hope we take it up. In order to help with this, I've worked with some colleagues to develop the National Student Support Accelerator, which basically is there to help scale high impact tutoring. And to do this, we've used existing research and continue to run new research projects that inform tools that we're developing. And I've put a bunch of them to answer questions and in the chat to help programs improve and districts to choose and implement high impact programs. And we're also working to engage a full range of stakeholders in the work, teachers, parents, school leaders, policymakers. So if you're interested in this work, just take a look at our website at studentsupportaccelerator.org or talk to me. We've really been working so that all students have access to this effective tutor who ensures their learning and just overall well-being and success.
Oh, wow. There were so many great quotes in there. Jill was doing it. I was inspired. I kind of wasn't paying attention. That was fantastic. And I want to pull out one thing that Janice kind of mentioned. She talked about staffing being a barrier. And in this moment, there's a great challenge and great opportunity. That was you, Susanna. But talk to us about some of the barriers, because I think those are the things that are going to obviously prevent us from taking advantage of this moment. So curious about what you all see as being those barriers. If there are things that you're addressing them, would love to know that. And if there are innovative things you're seeing others do that you think would be helpful to our listeners, would love to hear more about that. And Janice, since you called staffing out, I'm going to start with you, and then it'll be Susanna, Jessica, Shanda, and AJ. And so I'm going to pull back again and let you all discuss.
Well, I think we've highlighted quite a few of those, so I definitely don't want to be, too redundant in the conversation. I think staffing is one. I think we also have to understand that leaders are overburdened right now. When I was a principal and a district leader, when people would say they were overwhelmed, I kind of like roll my eyes, like, okay, people are really overwhelmed now. And we got to take a moment and figure that out. We have to understand that everyone is trying to get the attention of the superintendent, and it's not going to work. You have to really figure out different ways to have entry points, which is why it's so good that there's a diverse group of individuals on this call today, because you really have to start calling upon different leaders throughout the district to really bring some of this work to the forefront. And so, and also just understand that people are juggling a lot. I mean, when you look at that recovery framework that the chief officers of state schools put out, there are 10 different domains. And so people are trying to figure out a whole lot of stuff, and honestly spending a bunch of time in that first one, which is how to reopen schools safely. And so I think anyone, whether you are a vendor or a partner, even a funder, you just got to think about the humans are running these organizations and districts, and that there's only so much bandwidth. I think the other thing is that, we want models of success. So we've seen a lot of different examples, and there was a real rush to do something. Like, I've been in that position where you have to do something to show that you're making progress. And so people have already made choices that they are now living with. And so we really have to make sure there's a working definition that people understand around high quality and high dosage tutoring. And I think the work that Susanna's doing, the work that our group is going to be doing, is going to help to add to the discourse on that. And then I think lastly, and this has come up a lot already, is just making sure it's sustainable and cost effective. There are a lot of fantastic programs out there, but if they're not cost effective, then they're not going to see the light of day in a public school setting where the kids need it the most. And so we really have to think about how we do this and how we scale it in a way that people can actually afford it, so that our kids can have access to it.
Yeah, that's great. I think I pretty much have the same barriers in mind. I think there's kind of one technical barrier of schedules that many districts are running into. How do you schedule in the day? And I do think we need school models for bringing high impact tutoring at scale into schools. And so that's one barrier I would really think about. The second is this kind of adequate district level capacity to support design and implementation of a new program. It's just such an exhausting time to be in schools right now. So I think there we just have to make it as easy as possible. So tools, programs, things like that can really simplify the decision-making process. And also some kinds of supports, philanthropy can be part of this, states can be part of it, that can just take some of the administrative burden off of it. The final thing, I think, is finding qualified tutors. We know it's a really hard labor market right now all across the country. I think in the long run, that may bring us some benefits if what we can do now are to build systems that bring in really diverse, strong tutors into schools. I think in the long run, they can be great pipelines. Some states are building tutoring cores. They are working with their teacher preparation programs so that part of teacher preparation is tutoring, and that can really change our ability to find tutors. So I think there's some great work going on, but if I had to say what the barriers are, I'd say scheduling, district level capacity, and then finding the tutors.
Melanie, was I next? I forgot your order.
Absolutely. I also, at this point, since we're coming down to the end, if there's something you want to add, go ahead. If you want to pull back, we can make time for more Q&A.
Okay, I'll go quickly. So something Susanna said that struck me was that administrative piece. So recently coming from a state role, I'm very familiar with all of the administrative burdens that districts often face. And so it's hard to have a really great tutoring program if you don't have really great instructional materials. And so I'm seeing more and more folks are getting creative on helping ways to help relieve that administrative burden. So like Tennessee and Texas, they've made sure that everyone in their state who wants access to Zern for tutoring has that access. So I think the more that states can lean in and support or whoever can make this easier for districts so that they don't each have to go through their own local procurement process, it can really help a lot when it comes to making sure they have those high quality materials. And Jessica, I think maybe you were next.
So I would echo everything that my fellow panelists are saying. And the other thing that I want to name is that I think it is critical, again, to underscore how important it is that these tutors be highly trained and accountable to implementing an evidence-based curriculum with fidelity. And in my experience, relying upon volunteers is not going to get the same level of results as highly trained tutors. And so what we've done with Ignite Reading is we pay our tutors and we pay them quite well. And so they're motivated to do exactly what we're telling them to do when it comes to the training and the ongoing targeted differentiated feedback that each of them are receiving. And that is playing out in the results that we're seeing with our students.
Anything to add, AJ? Otherwise, I have a question from Barbara that I was going to uplift.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of sustainability and barriers, I mean, cost is a big one. And although I think encouraging everyone to kind of fight for sustained education funding, we're also very practical. And what's really important to think about is identifying a cost-effective approach that is truly accessible to schools and districts throughout the United States. And that's something we have prioritized at Saga. From our core program that was researched early in the earliest stages with the University of Chicago, the cost per pupil was like roughly $3,100 to like $3,500 per student. We have since then done a lot of work to develop new models that are more cost-effective. For example, we have a new blended learning model where we integrate adaptive learning technologies that brought the cost down to roughly $1,800 to $2,000 per student. And we have interesting online models that we're implementing now that are roughly $1,300 per student in terms of the share that the districts are allocating. So we're kind of on a trajectory to identifying a model that could be at or under $1,000 per student, which I think is really important threshold to sustain this work through a single source of public dollars, which could be Title I funding in the long term. And I know there's a lot we're really interested in learning about when it comes to online tutoring. One of the things that was interesting was from a human capital perspective, because when we're not constrained by geography, it was much easier for us to recruit. In fact, in every circumstance where we had an online tutoring program, we were actually oversubscribed. We didn't have any barriers for getting the human capital we needed. So that tells us something. This is worthy of additional exploration. But of course, similar to what everyone has shared, it was challenging to get some in-person tutoring during the context of COVID-19. But also, if I think about the general population of the United States, not every school and district in America has access to the same kind of ecosystem as like Chicago, where you have colleges and universities around it. And so we also want to be very mindful about how can we, when we think about scale, making sure that there are models that are accessible to also rural and suburban communities as well, which is another reason why we're interested in the potential of online instruction.
Thank you. So I'm going to try to be really ambitious and get 2 questions in. You all do not have to answer both. The first one is from Barbara, And it really talks about families, which I often find we don't engage in when we're talking about tutoring. And she wants to know if there are any strategies to give high impact tutoring support to parents so that they can actually support their students involved in tutoring, and not like the normal parent engagement, but anything that you all have seen that I assume this is in her question, that would maybe increase the efficacy of the tutoring itself.
Yeah, I'll hop on real fast. So when our schools began to shut down in Louisiana, I had lots of teachers and districts reach out to me, but I also had lots of parents because they knew I was in education, and they were asking me, like, what can I do to help my child at home? And the first thing I told them every time about math was like, do you have a Zern account? Like, go create a Zern account for your students at home. And that's still what I tell people all the time, because as a parent, you're able to set up an account for your child. And even if they're not doing tutoring with Zern at school, you still have access to all those independent digital lessons that you can then do with your child at home. So those same high quality resources that a tutor could use at school, a parent could use at home. And of course, we have like additional resources, like you mentioned, for parents, but that ability to actually have access to those same lessons, I think, is something that's very special about Zern.
Anyone else want to weigh in? Otherwise I can sneak in another. Okay, go ahead, Jessica.
I'll follow into Shonda. So I am a parent of a 7-year-old and have watched her on her journey of learning to read, which has given me even more acute insight into how to better serve parents in their own work with their students, not their students, their children. And when we work with a school, we are in partnership, and all of the data that's coming through from our program, which is so incredibly data rich, is shared with the school, along with instructional implications that help inform the programming that's already happening at the school. And that includes student by student, incredibly granular information around what it is that they need to be working on, so that teachers can incorporate that into their own small group instruction, but also be bubbling that back up to parents. Separately, we're beginning to think a lot more about what are the additional supplemental resources that we can start to create that can be shared back to classroom teachers, either for classroom practice or for them to then be sharing with parents for ongoing support at home.
I'm just going to take one more shot. Oh, sorry. One quick shot at this too, which is that I do think there is this other role for parents as well in advocating for having high impact tutoring in their schools, that this should be an expectation, and that parents can be really important, not only for their own children, but for all the children in their school and in their district.
AJ, did you want to try to go ahead? There's no way I'm squeezing another question, so you can.
So one of the innovative things we've done at Saga in the context of COVID-19 is work with our technology team to codify what we know to be key components of effective tutoring. And we developed a free self-paced basic training program on components of effective tutoring that's agnostic to grade level, that's agnostic to subject, that anyone can use. So if you're a district leader interested in implementing a tutoring program, you can go to our website now. People can sign up and go through this comprehensive, engaging platform. Parents can use it as well. It's a really great tool if a parent is interested in maybe providing some tutoring to their child. This is a really great resource. And it's exciting to know that there are some very basic things people can do that will completely transform the quality of their tutoring. And so this is what this resource can do. So parents absolutely could use it as well.
Thank you so much. I knew this was going to happen. I know I can talk to you all day, but this has been fantastic. I have learned a lot. I'm sure our audience has as well. And thank you to each of you for taking the time to participate and engage in this conversation. Also want to thank our audience for their great questions. We weren't able to get to all of them, but we do appreciate you participating and lifting them up. And with that, I will turn it back over to Jill.
Thank you so much, Melanie, all of our presenters and speakers. This was not only engaging and informative, but one of the most interactive GLR Learning Tuesday webinars I've seen in terms of questions and comments and enthusiasm and excitement and quotable moments. So thank you, everybody, for all that you've done to share your wisdom and your thoughts and your enthusiasm about your work with the hundreds of people that we've had on the call today, and the many others who are going to participate via listening to the recording later on. I just wanted to put up a couple of closing slides just to remind you all about upcoming webinars that the Campaign for Grade Level Reading is going to be hosting in a variety of our different webinar series. We have our Crucible of Practice Salon, which is on Tuesday at 12:30 next week, also followed later that day by our Learning Loss Recovery Challenge GLR Learning Tuesday webinar at 3 o'clock, so this time next week. We'll have our Funder to Funder webinar that will be following on Tuesday, March 15th, and then a double header again with another Learning Loss Recovery Challenge webinar at 3 o'clock on community schools on the 15th. And then we have a new series, Housing as a Platform, which is going to be lifting up some really amazing work from the Boston Housing Authority to support children at risk of homelessness with vouchers in the city of Boston. So we really encourage you to join us. I'm going to put a link in the chat to register for different series that I just mentioned. With that, I just want to thank everyone again for participating, to Melanie for her phenomenal facilitation and moderation. And we look forward to seeing you all at future GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars and Overdeck Family Foundation webinars and lots of other conversations in the near future. So stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you very, very much and have a really good rest of your days.